I returned from Germany after 10 years apart, eagerly anticipating surprising my son Parker in the beautiful Austin home I bought him. But as I opened the gate and heard someone yelling, "Faster, Carter," or you know what happens next, I was struck like lightning by what I saw. My successful CEO's son was on his knees washing a car while wearing a name tag that read, "Parker Carter, House Staff." They had turned my boy into their personal servant. They would pay for daring to bully my son. My name is Corvin Carter, and this is how I fought back to save my child. Before I tell you what I found when I walked through that gate, drop a comment with where you're watching from and the time right now. I'm curious if you're starting your day with this story or ending it. 10 years of German engineering precision had taught me that the best surprises come from meticulous planning. The taxi pulled away from the beautiful Austin home I'd purchased for my son Parker, leaving me standing at the wrought iron gate with my heart pounding in anticipation. Every overtime shift at BMW in Munich, every lonely weekend spent perfecting aircraft engine designs, every Christmas spent thousands of miles from family. It had all been worth it to give Parker this foundation. This $750,000 investment represented everything I'd dreamed of providing for my boy. The red brick colonial with its circular driveway and towering oak trees was supposed to be his sanctuary, his launching pad to success. Parker had no idea I was coming home early from Germany. The original plan was to surprise him next month, but when the Munich project wrapped up ahead of schedule, I couldn't resist seeing that Christmas morning joy light up his face again. As I approached the gate, I noticed it stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could hear voices from the driveway, one sharp and commanding, cutting through the humid Texas air like a blade. "Faster, Carter, or you know what happens next." The voice belonged to a man I didn't recognize, dripping with menace and the kind of entitled arrogance that made my engineer's mind recoil. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud heavy with unspoken consequences. My blood chilled. Carter. That was my son's last name, but something about the tone made my protective instincts flare. I pushed the gate open wider, stepping onto the brick pathway that led to my son's home. What I saw next shattered every expectation I'd carried across the Atlantic. There was Parker, my brilliant boy who'd graduated summa cum laude from UT Austin, who'd built a thriving tech startup from nothing, on his knees beside a gleaming black Mercedes. He wore a crisp white uniform shirt and black slacks that screamed service industry, complete with a plastic name tag pinned to his chest, reading Parker Carter, House Staff. My son was scrubbing tire rims with the desperate intensity of someone who knew the consequences of imperfection. His movements were practiced, efficient, the way someone moves when they've endured the same humiliation hundreds of times before. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on his back as he worked, sweat-staining his uniform shirt. Standing over him was a man in his 40s, arms crossed, watching Parker's every move with the cold satisfaction of someone who enjoyed wielding power over others. This stranger was supervising my successful son like he was nothing more than hired help. The name tag caught the sunlight, that plastic rectangle, transforming my boy from Parker Carter, CEO and tech innovator, into Parker Carter, House Staff. Property, a servant in his own home. I stood frozen behind the oak tree, my mind struggling to process this nightmare. The surprise I'd planned for 10 years had become something I couldn't have imagined in my worst dreams. My son, my pride and joy, had been reduced to wearing a name tag that stripped away everything he'd accomplished. Parker. The word escaped my lips before I could stop it, carrying 10 years of separation and a father's growing fury. What the hell is going on here? The sound of my voice hit Parker like a physical blow. My son's head snapped up from the Mercedes wheel, his face draining of color as our eyes met across the driveway. In that split second, I watched 29 years of shared history flash between us. Little league games where I'd cheered from the sidelines. Graduation day when he'd walked across that stage with honors, the proud phone calls about his startup's first million in revenue. Now he scrambled to his feet with the frantic energy of someone caught in an unforgivable act. His hands flew to the plastic name tag, fumbling to unpin it from his sweat-stained uniform shirt. But his fingers shook so badly he couldn't manage the simple clasp, and the damning evidence remained pinned to his chest, like a scarlet letter. "Dad, Parker's voice cracked like a teenager's. "You weren't supposed to be here until next month." The man who'd been barking orders melted away into the background, suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. Coward. I stepped fully onto the property that should have been my son's kingdom, my engineer's mind cataloging every detail that felt wrong. The manicured lawn was pristine, but Parker's hands were raw and red from harsh cleaning chemicals. The circular driveway gleamed, but my boy looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Parker, what is this?" I gestured at his uniform at the name tag he was still desperately trying to remove. "Why are you dressed like Corvin Carter, I presume?" The voice came from behind me, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. I turned to see a woman in her early 30s, gliding down the front steps of what should have been Parker's sanctuary. She moved with the calculated grace of someone accustomed to being obeyed, her designer dress and perfect makeup a stark contrast to my son's disheveled appearance. This had to be Kimberly Parker's wife, but the woman I'd spoken to during video calls had been warm deferential to Parker's success. This version carried herself like she owned everything she surveyed, including my son. "I'm Kimberly Westfield," she said, extending a manicured hand that felt cold against my palm. "Parker's told me so much about his father, the brilliant engineer, though he failed to mention you were coming home early." Her eyes flicked to Parker with something that might have been displeasure, and I watched my grown son actually flinch under her gaze. "Kimberly, what's going on here?" I pulled my hand back, studying her face for answers. "Why is Parker dressed like house staff?" Her laugh was like crystal breaking. "Oh, that old thing Parker's been helping out with some maintenance around the property. You know how men are. They need to feel useful." She moved to Parker's side with predatory smoothness. "Don't you, honey?" The endearment dripped with condescension, and I watched my son's shoulders slump further. This wasn't the confident CEO who used to debate business strategy with me over Sunday dinners. This was a broken man wearing a servant's uniform in his own home. "Parker's always been so generous with his time." Kimberly continued, her hand settling possessively on his arm. "Haven't you, dear? Now why don't you go finish up with the car? We can't have it looking anything less than perfect." "Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is." The house fell silent after midnight, save for the gentle hum of central air conditioning fighting the Texas heat. I sat on Parker's bed, in what should have been the master bedroom of his own home, watching my son stare at the ceiling, like he was searching for answers. Hours had passed since that uncomfortable driveway scene. Kimberly had orchestrated the evening with military precision, directing Parker to finish the car-served dinner, then disappear into this back bedroom that felt more like servants' quarters. The contrast was stark. She dined on fine china, in the elegant dining room I'd helped him choose, while we shared leftover sandwiches on paper plates. "You want to know what happened?" Parker finally whispered. "But Dad, the truth is going to break your heart." I switched on the bedside lamp, casting warm glow across his gaunt features. When had my boy gotten so thin? When had laugh lines been replaced by deep creases of chronic stress? "Tell me about before," I said gently. "Tell me about Tech Vision Solutions." A ghost of a smile flickered across Parker's face, the first genuine expression I'd seen all day. "You remember the name." "Son, I remember every phone call, every update, every milestone." I settled back against the headboard. "Start from the beginning." Parker's eyes grew distant, traveling back to happier times. Tech Vision was everything I'd dreamed of, Dad. We started in a garage, but within 2 years we had 50 employees and a downtown Austin office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lady Bird Lake. His voice gained strength, and for a moment I glimpsed the confident CEO he'd once been. Our AI platform was revolutionary. We helped small businesses automate customer service, inventory management, entire operational workflows. Fortune 500 companies were calling us. We had a $5 million valuation and investors lining up around the block. I remembered those calls vividly. Parker's excitement crackling through international connections as he described board meetings, expansion plans, possibilities of going public. I'd been so proud working long Munich shifts, knowing every sacrifice was worth seeing my son succeed beyond my wildest dreams. And Kimberly. I asked, though today's woman bore little resemblance to the loving wife he'd described in video calls. "She was perfect back then." Parker's voice softened with genuine affection. Beautiful, supportive, everything a man could want. She'd bring lunch to the office charm investors at dinner parties, celebrate every victory like it was her own. When we got married, I thought I was the luckiest man alive. He sat up slowly, running hands through hair that needed cutting. The wedding was spectacular. Her family spared no expense. The Westfields knew how to throw a party, and they welcomed me like their own son. Wellington kept talking about family investments and building generational wealth together. I had everything, Dad. Everything you worked so hard to give me the foundation for. His voice cracked with lost dreams. The company, the house, the wife, the future. I was living the American dream you'd sacrificed 10 years in Germany to make possible. The silence stretched between us heavy with unspoken tragedy. I could see the exact moment his expression shifted from nostalgia to something darker, more painful. Then the Westfields came into our lives. The moonlight streaming through the bedroom window caught the pain etched in Parker's features as he continued his story. Outside, Austin's night sounds provided a gentle backdrop. Distant traffic, the occasional siren, the hum of a city that never truly slept. But inside this room, time seemed suspended as my son relived his nightmare. Wellington Westfield was everything I thought I wanted to become, Parker said, his voice taking on a bitter edge. Real estate mogul, self-made millionaire, the kind of man who commanded respect when he walked into a room. At family dinners, he'd regale us with stories about his latest developments, his connections with city council members, his ability to turn vacant lots into shopping centers worth millions. I watched my son's hands clench into fists as he spoke knuckles white against the bedsheets. 6 months after the wedding, Wellington approached me with what he called the opportunity of a lifetime. He'd identified a prime piece of land in South Austin, 50 acres that the city was planning to rezone for mixed-use development, shopping restaurants, luxury condos. He had inside information that the zoning approval was guaranteed. The pieces were already falling into place in my engineer's mind, but I let Parker continue. Sometimes the only way through pain is straight ahead. He needed investors to close the deal quickly before word got out, and the price skyrocketed. Family investors, he said, people he could trust. Parker's laugh was hollow, devoid of any humor. The minimum buy-in was $1.2 million. My heart sank. That was everything. Parker's entire liquid net worth, from TechVision's success, the emergency fund I'd taught him to maintain, probably his credit lines too. I should have done due diligence, Dad. Should have hired my own attorney, my own surveyor, my own everything. But this was family. Kimberly was so excited about the project, about how it would secure our future together. Wellington had charts, projections, architectural renderings. It looked bulletproof. What happened? I asked, though I already knew the answer would destroy me. The land was worthless swampland that flooded every spring. The zoning application had been rejected months before Wellington ever approached me. The inside information was fabricated, the city council connections were lies, and the architectural firm he'd hired was a shell company run by his brother-in-law. Parker's voice cracked as he continued. By the time I figured it out, the money was gone, vanished into a maze of LLCs and offshore accounts that my lawyers couldn't untangle. Wellington claimed he'd been defrauded too, that we were all victims of a sophisticated scam. But somehow the Westfield family fortune remained intact while mine evaporated. I felt rage building in my chest like steam in a pressure cooker. This wasn't just theft. It was betrayal of the worst kind perpetrated by people who'd welcomed my son into their family. The lawsuits came next, Parker whispered. Investors who'd put money into TechVision based on my personal guarantee. Creditors who'd extended lines of credit against my assets. Employees who hadn't been paid because our accounts were frozen. They didn't just take my money, Dad. They destroyed my reputation, my credit, everything. He turned to face me fully, and I saw tears glistening in his eyes. The business press had a field day. Tech Wunderkind falls for real estate scam. AI company CEO loses everything and family investment gone wrong. Within 6 months, TechVision was bankrupt, and I was persona non grata in the Austin business community. And when I lost everything, they offered me a solution. 3 a.m. found us in the kitchen that should have been the heart of Parker's home. He moved with practiced efficiency, preparing coffee with muscle memory, born of necessity rather than choice. Their solution was elegant in its cruelty. Parker said, measuring grounds with scientific precision. I was broke, homeless, unemployable. No bank would give me a loan, no company would hire the CEO who'd lost everything in a family investment scam. He poured steaming water over the grounds, but even this simple act carried the weight of servitude. Making coffee at 3 a.m. because that's what servants do. Wellington presented it as charity. Family taking care of family. Parker's voice carried bitter resignation. I could stay in the house you bought for me, Dad. The $750,000 investment you'd worked 10 years in Germany to afford. But there were conditions. The coffee maker gurgled as Parker leaned against the counter, shoulders sagging under invisible weight. I serve as the family's personal driver. All of them. Wellington, his wife, Margaret Kimberly, her brother Maximilian. Whenever they need to go anywhere day or night, I'm on call. My hands clenched around the mug he'd placed before me, ceramic warm but doing nothing to thaw the ice in my veins. I cook every meal for family gatherings. Thanksgiving dinner for 20 people, Christmas brunch, birthday parties. I plan menu shop for groceries, prepare everything from scratch, serve on fine china, then clean up while they retire to the living room. Parker moved to the sink, rinsing the pot, with movements that spoke of countless repetitions. I maintain this entire property, landscaping, pool cleaning, repairs, seasonal decorations. When something breaks, I fix it. When something needs upgrading, I research options and present them for approval, like a contractor bidding for work. The list continued, each item delivered in the flat tone of someone who'd learned to disconnect from his own degradation. I detail their cars weekly, organize their closets seasonally, serve drinks at parties while wearing a uniform so guests know I'm staff, not family. He turned to face me, and in the harsh lighting I could see how thoroughly they'd broken him. But the worst part is Wellington's evening routine. After dinner, he expects a 30-minute massage while he watches the news, says it helps with his arthritis. My son, a former CEO who'd once commanded boardrooms, reduced to rubbing an old man's shoulders like a personal masseuse. They made me wear a uniform, Dad, with a name tag like I'm their property. Parker's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Every morning I pin that plastic rectangle to my shirt, and every morning it reminds me that I'm not Parker Carter, former CEO. I'm Parker Carter house staff, a servant in the home my father bought me. The silence stretched between us, filled with 2 years' worth of accumulated humiliation. I wanted to rage to tear down this arrangement with my bare hands, but Parker wasn't finished. But the worst part is what they made me sign. Dawn broke over Austin as I walked through the doors of the Austin Public Library. Sleep had been impossible after Parker's revelations. My engineer's mind had spent the night cataloging everything my son had told me and formulating a plan of attack. 30 years of troubleshooting complex aircraft systems had taught me that every problem has a solution. You just need to gather enough data to find the weak points. The Westfield family might think they'd created an airtight trap, but every system has vulnerabilities. I claimed a corner workstation and began my systematic investigation. Wellington, Westfield, Austin, Texas. Westfield Real Estate Development. Westfield Family Business. What I found painted a disturbing picture. Wellington's real estate ventures had a pattern. Partnerships that ended badly for everyone except the Westfield's investors, who'd lost everything while the family fortune grew. And a trail of lawsuits quietly settled out of court. Excuse me, are you Corvin Carter? I looked up to find a woman in her mid-60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Yes, I am. Do we know each other? Oh, I'm Helen Anderson. I live 2 houses down from Parker. She pulled up a chair beside me. I heard you'd come home from Germany. I was hoping we might talk. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't casual neighborly conversation. What about what's been happening to Parker? I've been watching Mr. Carter, and what I've seen has been breaking my heart for 2 years. 2 years. The timeline matched Parker's solution. I used to see Parker in business suits heading off to work with that confident stride successful young men have. Helen continued. Then suddenly he was outside at 6 every morning washing cars in a uniform. At first I thought he'd hired a service, but then I realized it was Parker himself. My hands clenched as she continued. I've watched him carry groceries like he was restocking a restaurant. I've seen him on ladders, cleaning gutters on his knees, weeding flower beds, polishing windows. Always in that uniform, always with that name tag. Helen pulled out a small notebook. I started keeping records. Call it a retired librarian's instinct, but something felt terribly wrong. She opened it, revealing pages of careful handwriting. June 15th, 2022. Parker washing 3 cars, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. June 22nd, Parker serving drinks at backyard party and server's uniform guests, treating him like hired help. The systematic nature of her observations impressed me. This woman had been conducting her own investigation for months. I've wanted to help, but Parker always seemed so ashamed when he saw me watching. He'd hurry to finish his task and disappear inside. Helen closed the notebook and looked directly into my eyes. I don't know what hold that family has over your son, but I've been praying someone would come who could help him. When I heard you were back from Germany, I hoped that someone was you. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Mr. Carter, there's something else you need to know about the Westfields. 20 minutes later, we sat at Radio Coffee on Barton Springs Road, the morning rush providing perfect cover for our conversation. Helen had insisted we move somewhere more discreet, and now I understood why. She pulled out a manila folder thick with documents and spread them across our table. Before I retired, I worked as a bookkeeper for 35 years, Mr. Carter. I know how to read financial records, and I know when something doesn't add up. The papers showed corporate filings, loan documents, and business registrations, all bearing official Texas state seals. About 6 months ago, I got curious about the Westfield family's business operations, Helen said quietly. All those expensive cars, constant renovations, lavish parties. Wellington claims real estate development, but I never saw actual projects. She pointed to the first documents. So I researched. Public records, corporate filings, loan applications. It's all available if you know where to look. What she'd uncovered made my blood run cold. The Westfield family operates 18 separate shell companies, Helen said, tracing down a handwritten list. Lone Star Development, LLC, Austin Properties. Holdings, Texas Commercial Ventures. They sound legitimate, but they're just paper entities with no real operations. I studied the documents, catching patterns with my technical eye. These loan amounts... Exactly. Helen's expression grew grim. Each company has substantial business loans. 50,000 here, 100,000 there, some as large as 300,000. Individually, they don't seem suspicious, but together... She pulled out a calculator, entering figures from her list. The total climbed $27,000, $284,000, $456,000, $789,000. Total debt across all 18 companies is $2.3 million, Helen said quietly. My coffee grew cold. But if these are shell companies, how did they qualify for loans? Helen pulled out another set of documents. Each loan required a personal guarantor, someone with sufficient assets and creditworthiness to back the debt if the company defaulted. She slid papers across to me, and I saw Parker's signature repeated across dozens of loan documents. Parker Carter, guarantor. Parker Carter, personally responsible. Parker Carter, liable for all debts. They used his tech vision success, his credit rating, his assets as collateral for every single loan, Helen explained. When each company inevitably failed and defaulted, the debt transferred directly to Parker as guarantor. The coffee shop noise faded as the full scope became clear. This wasn't just the real estate scam, this was systematic financial entrapment on a massive scale. They've created a debt trap worth over $2 million in your son's name, Helen said heavily. Every shell company, every loan, every default was orchestrated to transfer maximum liability to Parker while keeping Westfield assets protected. I stared at the documents, each one another link in the chain binding my son to his captors. The elegant cruelty was breathtaking. They'd used Parker's own success as a weapon against him, and legally Parker is responsible for every penny. Helen's recommendation led me to the 32nd floor of the Frostbank Tower, where Caroline Whitmore's law office commanded a view of the Texas state capitol. The nameplate read, Whitmore and Associates, Civil Rights and Human Trafficking Defense, explaining why Helen called her the lawyer who takes down dirty rich families. Caroline was a woman in her early 50s with steel-gray hair and the direct gaze of someone who'd seen every form of human cruelty. Her office walls displayed framed newspaper clippings documenting victories against powerful defendants who thought themselves untouchable. Helen Anderson spoke very highly of you, I began. Helen's got a sharp eye for injustice, Caroline replied, opening a legal pad. She gave me basics over the phone, but I need everything directly from you. Don't leave out any details. I laid out the nightmare. Parker's fall from CEO to servant, the real estate scam, the degrading uniform Helen's shell company discovery. Caroline took steady notes, asking pointed questions about dates and documentation. When I finished, she leaned back and studied me. Mr. Carter, what the Westfield family has done isn't just morally reprehensible, it's a federal crime. She spread Helen's documents across her desk. This debt bondage scheme, using fraudulent obligations to force unpaid labor, falls under federal human trafficking statutes. The uniform name tag degrading assignments, threats of financial ruin. This is textbook labor trafficking. Hope flared in my chest. So we can stop them. We can destroy them legally, Caroline said with predatory satisfaction. The evidence is overwhelming. Fraudulent shell companies, forged documents, debt bondage, human trafficking. Any prosecutor would jump at this case. She walked to the window, gazing at the Capitol dome. But you need to understand what you're up against. The Westfields have operated in Austin for 4 generations. They have connections with judges, prosecutors, police commissioners. When we file charges, they won't just fight back legally. What do you mean? Caroline's expression grew grave. Families like the Westfields don't just make threats. They follow through. They'll destroy your reputation, credibility to work. They'll dig up every mistake you've made and use it against you. She pulled out a thick file. I've represented 3 other Westfield victims. A contractor who refused to falsify inspection reports. An accountant who discovered tax fraud. A city planner who wouldn't approve a zoning variance. What happened to them? The contractor's business failed after anonymous complaints to licensing boards. The accountant was arrested on fabricated embezzlement charges that took 2 years to dismiss. The city planner, Caroline paused, her expression darkening, died in what police ruled a single-car accident on a clear, dry night. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees. You're saying they killed him. I'm saying when the Westfields feel cornered, people who threaten them suffer unfortunate accidents. Caroline's voice was steel. We can destroy them legally, but they'll try to destroy you first. She closed the file and looked directly into my eyes. Mr. Carter, I need you to understand. The Westfields have killed to protect their empire before. The Westfield estate in Westlake Hills sprawled across manicured acres, like a monument to generational wealth. Caroline's Mercedes wound up the circular driveway past luxury vehicles, parked beneath the porte cochere, a Bentley Tesla and the black Mercedes I'd seen Parker washing yesterday. Remember, Caroline said, approaching the imposing entrance, we're giving them one chance to settle quietly. Some families get scared when caught and choose the path of least resistance. A uniformed housekeeper led us through marble hallways lined with Westfield ancestor portraits. The wealth was displayed with old money arrogance, Persian rugs costing more than most cars, crystal chandeliers belonging in European palaces, furniture whispering of auction houses. Wellington Westfield waited in his study behind a massive desk, 70-something, silver-haired with soft features of inherited privilege, and cold eyes accustomed to getting his way through intimidation rather than merit. Mr. Carter, he said without rising voice, dripping condescension, I understand you have concerns about your son's living arrangements. Parker is quite content with his current situation. Content. The word came out sharp. You mean serving as your unpaid slave in his own house? Wellington's laugh was like ice cracking. Such dramatic language. Parker is family, and family helps family during difficult times. Caroline stepped forward, placing her briefcase on his desk with authority. Mr. Westfield, I am attorney Caroline Whitmore. These documents detail your systematic fraud and human trafficking operation. She opened the case precisely, spreading Helen's research across his desk. 18 shell companies, $2.3 million in fraudulent debt, forced labor. Everything needed for federal trafficking charges. Uncertainty flickered in Wellington's eyes as he glanced at documentation quickly replaced by arrogance. Ridiculous allegations from a desperate father and ambulance-chasing lawyer. The study door opened. Maximilian Westfield entered with predatory grace, early 40s, built for violence rather than vanity. His eyes held shark-like coldness. Problems, Dad. His voice carried subtle menace. I understood why Parker seemed so broken. This man had been the instrument of daily humiliation. Nothing we can't handle, Wellington replied, but I caught the glance between father and son, silent communication that made my skin crawl. Caroline remained unfazed. We're offering one opportunity to resolve this quietly. Release Parker from all obligations, return full property ownership, and pay $3.5 million in damages for 2 years of forced labor and emotional trauma. Wellington's face flushed red. $3.5 million for that pathetic excuse who couldn't manage his own business? The alternative is federal prosecution, asset forfeiture, and prison sentences, destroying your family's reputation for generations, Caroline replied calmly. Maximilian stepped closer, presence filling the room like a storm cloud. You walk into our home making threats. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I stood to face him, protective instincts, screaming. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Bullies who prey on vulnerable people because they're too weak to succeed on merit. Wellington rose slowly, hands shaking with fury. You think some old engineer can threaten the Westfield family? We've owned this city for 4 generations. We have judges, politicians, and police commissioners in our pocket. You have 48 hours to reconsider, or we destroy you completely." The silence that followed our ultimatum stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Wellington Westfield stared at the documents spread across his desk, his face cycling through emotions, surprise, calculation, and finally settling into the cold fury of someone unaccustomed to being challenged. 48 hours. Wellington's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "You walk into my home, make accusations based on fabricated evidence, and give me a deadline." He swept the papers off his desk with a violent motion, sending Helen's careful research scattering across the Persian rug. "I've been building this family's empire since before you were changing your son's diapers, Carter. Do you have any idea how many people have tried to threaten the Westfields over the years?" Maximilian moved closer to where Caroline and I stood, his presence radiating barely contained violence. I could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something darker, the scent of a predator who enjoyed the hunt. "Every single one of them learned the same lesson you're about to learn." Wellington continued, rising from his chair with the deliberate movements of someone savoring what came next. "The Westfield family doesn't negotiate with extortionists." This isn't extortion," Caroline interjected calmly, pulling out her phone with practiced discretion. "This is a settlement offer for documented crimes. Everything we've presented is backed by public records and witness testimony." Wellington's laugh was like breaking glass. "Public records. Witness testimony. You naive little lawyer. Do you think any of that matters when Judge Morrison owes his election to Westfield campaign contributions? When District Attorney Phillips got his start at our law firm, when half the city council members have their mortgages held by Westfield Financial. The casual way he revealed his corruption network made my engineer's mind recoil. This wasn't just a family business, it was a criminal organization with tentacles throughout Austin's power structure. "You see, Mr. Carter," Wellington continued, moving around his desk with predatory grace, "your son understood something you apparently don't. In this city, the Westfield name means something. It means respect. It means power. It means that when we say someone is finished, they're finished." Maximilian stepped even closer, close enough that I could see the small scar above his left eyebrow and the cold calculation in his eyes. "Parker learned that lesson the hard way. Took him about 6 months to break completely, but he got there eventually." "Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's a promise," Maximilian replied, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Just like the promise I made to that city planner who thought he could stand up to us. Amazing how quickly accidents happen to people who don't know their place." Caroline's phone remained steady in her hand, recording every word. "Mr. Westfield, you're admitting to witness intimidation, judicial corruption, and implied threats of violence. I hope you understand that everything you're saying is being documented." Wellington glanced at the phone with amused contempt. "Document whatever you like, sweetheart. By the time we're finished with you, no one will care what's on that recording. Your law license will be revoked, your reputation destroyed, and your practice bankrupt." He moved to stand directly in front of me, close enough that I could see the network of broken blood vessels in his eyes, the mark of a man who'd spent decades drowning his conscience in expensive whiskey. "As for you, Carter, I'm going to enjoy watching you lose everything just like your pathetic son did. Your savings, your reputation, your ability to work, gone. And when you're broken and desperate, maybe I'll offer you the same deal I gave Parker. You can join him in serving my family." The malice in his voice was so pure it was almost hypnotic. "By tomorrow you'll wish you'd stayed in Germany." Wellington stepped back, straightening his tie with the satisfied air of someone who'd just delivered a killing blow. "Now get off my property before I have you arrested for trespassing." The drive from the Westfield estate was tense with unspoken fury. Caroline gripped the steering wheel as we navigated Austin traffic, her legal mind already shifting strategies. "That went exactly as expected," she said finally. "Wellington's arrogance gave us everything for a federal case, but we need more than financial documents and recorded threats." She pulled into a medical building near Seton Hospital. "We need medical documentation of what they've done to Parker. Physical evidence of psychological trauma no judge can dismiss." Dr. Raven Morrison's psychology practice occupied a corner suite, flooded with natural light. The doctor was a woman in her 40s, with the calm presence that immediately put people at ease, exactly what Parker needed after 2 years of systematic abuse. "Mr. Carter," she said with professional warmth, Caroline explained your son's situation. What we discuss is completely confidential. My only concern is Parker's well-being. Parker had been reluctant to come, but Caroline convinced him medical documentation was essential. Now he sat in Dr. Morrison's office, looking like a man preparing for surgery without anesthesia. Parker, let's start with your daily routine, Dr. Morrison began gently. Walk me through a typical day. What followed was 3 hours of heartbreaking testimony. Parker described waking at 5 a.m. to prepare Westfield family breakfast. Constant fear of making mistakes with consequences. Deliberate isolation from former friends and associates. They made sure I understood contact with my old life was forbidden, Parker whispered. When my former business partner called Maximilian, listened on speakerphone, then made me tell him I never wanted to see him again. Dr. Morrison took careful notes, revealing sophisticated psychological manipulation. What about threats to your physical safety? Maximilian never hit me directly, Parker replied, unconsciously rubbing his shoulder, but he made sure I understood what would happen if I didn't comply. He'd describe what happened to others who crossed the family, the city planner who died, the contractor destroyed. He'd tell these stories while cleaning his gun collection. Parker's clinical detachment was worse than tears would have been. This was a man who'd learned to disconnect from trauma to survive. Dr. Morrison spent another hour conducting standardized assessments, her expression growing graver with each evaluation. When she set down her clipboard, professional composure had given way to barely controlled anger. Mr. Carter, she said, facing me directly, what your son experienced isn't just employment abuse. This level of psychological control, systematic isolation, and fear-based compliance constitutes torture. The word hit like a physical blow. Torture. My son had been tortured for 2 years while I worked in Germany, unaware of his suffering. The psychological profile shows severe PTSD, clinical depression, and learned helplessness. Where victims become so conditioned to powerlessness, they stop trying to escape even when opportunities arise. Dr. Morrison organized her documentation. I'm legally required to report this as suspected human trafficking. Late afternoon storm clouds gathered over Austin as Dr. Morrison finished organizing Parker's evaluation. Thunder rumbled and rain began streaking the windows. Before you leave, Dr. Morrison said, her demeanor shifting to urgency, I need to discuss Parker's immediate safety. She closed the blinds, creating privacy. In 20 years of treating trauma victims, I've learned to recognize patterns. What Parker described isn't just abuse. It's a sophisticated control system designed to break someone completely. Parker shifted uncomfortably, but Dr. Morrison continued with gentle persistence. The most dangerous time for abuse victims is when they try to break free. Statistics show trafficking victims face 60% increased violence when attempting escape or seeking help. She pulled out a reference manual. I've documented 17 Texas cases over 5 years where trafficking victims were injured or killed trying to leave. Perpetrators view it as business, eliminating evidence and sending messages to other victims. The clinical discussion of violence made my stomach turn, but I forced myself to listen. What are you recommending? I asked. Ideally, Parker in a safe house until legal proceedings complete, she replied, addressing my son directly. Federal programs for trafficking victims. Secure locations, counseling, legal protection. Everything needed to heal while staying safe. Parker's reaction was immediate. No, absolutely not. His voice carried the first defiance I'd heard since returning. I won't be driven from my home. I won't hide like a criminal. This isn't about being criminal, Dr. Morrison said gently. This is about staying alive to see justice served. She's right, son. I added, though protective instincts screamed against hiding my boy in some facility. If these people are as dangerous as everyone says they are, Dr. Morrison interrupted with absolute certainty. The Westfields have documented history of eliminating threats. The city planner Caroline mentioned wasn't their first victim, won't be their last without precautions. Parker stood, abruptly pacing to the window. 2 years, Dad. 2 years living in fear, jumping at sounds, afraid to speak up, afraid to fight back. I won't spend another day hiding. I watched my son's profile, seeing the first glimpse of the strong man he'd been before the Westfields broke him. But strength without strategy was vulnerability. Then I'm staying with you, I said, decision crystallizing. Every night, every day until this is over. They want to threaten my family. They go through me first. Dr. Morrison nodded approvingly, but her expression remained grave. Mr. Carter, in my experience, families like the Westfields Don't just make threats. Thunder grew louder, lightning illuminating the office in stark black and white. In that electrical clarity, I saw fear in Dr. Morrison's eyes, fear from professional experience with predators in expensive suits. They eliminate problems permanently. The digital clock on the rental car dashboard read 11:17 p.m. as I merged onto I-35 South, heading back to Parker's house through the Texas night. The storm Dr. Morrison had predicted was beginning in earnest. Fat raindrops splattered against the windshield with increasing frequency, and distant lightning illuminated the dark highway in brief, stark moments. I should have been exhausted after the emotional marathon of the day, but adrenaline kept me alert. Doctor? Morrison's warnings echoed in my mind, mixing with images of Parker's broken expression and Wellington's cold threats. Every mile that passed brought me closer to my son, closer to the promise I'd made to protect him. The highway was nearly empty at this hour, just the occasional 18-wheeler rumbling past, and a few late-night commuters making their way home. Perfect conditions for what I didn't yet realize was about to happen. In my rearview mirror, I noticed a large pickup truck that had been maintaining the same distance behind me for the past several miles. Nothing unusual about that. Plenty of trucks use this stretch of I-35, but something about its headlight pattern nagged at my engineer's mind. Too consistent, too deliberate. My years working in Germany had taught me defensive driving techniques that most Americans never learned. BMW's corporate training included courses on executive protection, anti-terrorism, driving, and evasive maneuvers. At the time, it had seemed like corporate paranoia. Now those skills might save my life. The truck began closing distance. I eased my foot off the accelerator, giving the truck room to pass. Instead, it matched my speed reduction, maintaining that same deliberate following distance. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as Dr. Morrison's words came flooding back. They eliminate problems permanently. Rain was falling harder now, turning the asphalt slick and reducing visibility. Perfect conditions for what would look like a weather-related accident. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and began scanning for escape routes. The truck accelerated, suddenly pulling into the left lane beside me. Through the rain-streaked passenger window, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a thick-set man with the flat expression and dead eyes of a professional killer. This wasn't road rage or random violence. This was a hit. The truck swerved toward my car without warning. I yanked the steering wheel, right tires screaming as the rental car skidded toward the shoulder. The BMW training kicked in automatically. Don't overcorrect, maintain control. Look for your exit strategy. The driver had expected panic, expected me to lose control and roll into the ditch. Instead, I accelerated. The truck tried to match my speed, but the driver wasn't prepared for aggressive defensive tactics. I pulled ahead, then cut sharply back into the left lane, forcing him to brake hard or risk losing control on the wet pavement. But he wasn't giving up. The truck's engine roared as it accelerated again, this time aiming for a direct rear-end collision that would send my smaller car spinning into the concrete barrier at 70 miles per hour. I saw it coming in my mirrors, the truck bearing down like a battering ram, the assassin's face cold and focused behind the wheel. This wasn't meant to look like an accident anymore. This was an execution. At the last possible second, I jerked the wheel left and hit the brakes, simultaneously sending my car into a controlled slide across both lanes. The truck, committed to its killing blow, had no time to adjust. It struck the concrete barrier at full speed. The explosion lit up the night sky like a small sun metal and glass, erupting in all directions as the truck flipped end over end before coming to rest as a burning wreck. I pulled over on the shoulder, hands shaking as I called 911, watching the flames consume what remained of whoever had been sent to kill me. If they're willing to kill me, Parker doesn't stand a chance. The fluorescent lights in the Austin Police Department's traffic division buzzed overhead as I sat across from Officer Martinez, trying to convince him that what he saw as a routine highway accident was actually attempted murder. The coffee in the styrofoam cup had gone cold an hour ago, but I kept gripping it like an anchor to reality. "Let me understand this, Mr. Carter," Officer Martinez said, reviewing his notes with the weary patience of someone who'd heard every conspiracy theory imaginable. "You're claiming that this truck driver deliberately tried to ram your vehicle, but you have no proof beyond your own suspicions." "The driver was a professional," I insisted for the third time. The way he maintained following distance, the precision of his attack pattern. This wasn't road rage. This was a hit. Martinez glanced at his partner, Officer Johnson, who'd been silent throughout my statement. They exchanged the kind of look that said they'd dealt with traumatized accident victims before. People whose minds created elaborate explanations for random tragedies. Mr. Carter, according to our preliminary investigation, the truck driver was intoxicated. Officer Johnson said gently. Blood alcohol level .16. The rain made road conditions dangerous. Sometimes accidents are just accidents. I wanted to scream that they were wrong, that the Westfield family had connections throughout the city government, that this dismissal was exactly what Wellington had predicted. But arguing would only make me look more unstable. Can I go now? I asked, standing abruptly. You're free to leave, Martinez replied. We'll be in touch if we need anything else for the report. The drive back to Parker's house took 20 minutes through rain-slicked streets, every shadow potentially hiding another assassin, every approaching vehicle a potential threat. Dr. O. Morrison's warnings echoed in my mind alongside Wellington's cold promises of destruction. I found Parker's house dark, except for a single light in what I now knew was his servants' quarters. Using my key, I entered through the front door and immediately sensed something wrong. The house felt different, tense like the air before a thunderstorm. Parker, I called out softly. Dad, back here, came his muffled voice from the rear bedroom. I found him barricaded behind a dresser he'd pushed against the door, sitting on the floor with his back to the wall and a baseball bat across his knees. His face was pale eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from receiving very specific, very credible death threats. What happened? I asked, though I already knew the answer would confirm my worst fears. Maximilian called about an hour ago. Parker said, his voice barely above a whisper. He knew you'd been in an accident. He knew the exact time, the exact location, even knew that you'd survived when the truck driver didn't. My blood turned to ice. The police might think it was a coincidence, but Maximilian's knowledge proved this had been a coordinated attack. He said the next attempt wouldn't fail. Parker continued gripping the bat tighter. He said they'd tried to handle this quietly, but now they were done being subtle. What else did he say? Parker's voice cracked as he delivered the ultimatum. Dad, they said if we don't drop everything by midnight, we're both dead. The lawsuit, the medical reports, all of it. We have until midnight to call Caroline and withdraw everything, or they'll make sure neither of us sees tomorrow. I checked my watch. 11:43 p.m. 17 minutes until their deadline. We could call Caroline, I said, though the words tasted like defeat. We could. No, Parker interrupted, and I heard something in his voice I hadn't heard in 2 years. Defiance. I won't let them win. I won't spend the rest of my life as their slave, and I won't let them turn you into one too. He looked up at me with eyes that held both terror and determination. But Dad, we can't run. We can't hide, and the police won't help. Midnight struck with a crack of thunder that shook the house to its foundations. The storm that had been brewing all evening finally unleashed its full fury over Austin, sending sheets of rain against the windows and causing the lights to flicker ominously. Parker and I sat in his barricaded bedroom, listening to the wind howl through the oak trees outside like the voices of the damned. The power had been cutting in and out for the past hour, plunging us alternately into darkness and harsh electric light. Each time the lights failed, we held our breath, wondering if this was when they would come for us. The midnight deadline had passed without word from Caroline, without surrender, without the cowardly retreat the Westfields had demanded. Maybe they'll wait until the storm passes. Parker whispered, though neither of us believed it. That's when we heard the sound of breaking glass from somewhere in the back of the house. I pressed my finger to my lips, signaling Parker to stay silent, and crept toward the bedroom door. The baseball bat felt inadequate in my hands, but it was the only weapon we had. Through the crack under the door, I could see a flashlight beam moving through the hallway. Someone was inside the house. I know you're in here, Carter. Maximilian Westfield's voice echoed through the house, distorted by rage and what sounded like alcohol. You think you can threaten my family? You think some old engineer and his pathetic son can destroy 4 generations of Westfield power? The flashlight beam grew brighter as he moved closer to our hiding place, but it was the smell that made my blood freeze. The sharp chemical odor of gasoline seeping under the door. You should have taken the deal when we offered it. Maximilian continued, his voice taking on the unhinged quality of someone who'd crossed the line from criminal to psychopath. Should have crawled back to Germany with your tail between your legs. But no, you had to play hero. I could hear liquid splashing against the walls, the sound of gasoline being poured liberally throughout the house. The fumes were getting stronger, making my eyes water and my throat burn. This wasn't just a threat anymore. This was a man preparing to commit mass murder. Maximilian's lost it, I whispered to Parker, who had gone white as a sheet. He's going to burn the house down with us inside. Parker's hand shook as he gripped his baseball bat. Dad, there's no way out. He's between us and every exit. Through the walls, we could hear Maximilian continuing his deranged monologue as he methodically doused every room with accelerant. The family business requires certain sacrifices, loose ends that need to be cleaned up, witnesses that need to be silenced. The smell of gasoline was overwhelming now, so strong I could taste it on my tongue. My engineer's mind calculated how quickly this house would become an inferno once ignited. Less than 60 seconds for the flames to spread through every room. Maybe 3 minutes before the structure became completely engulfed. You brought this on yourselves. Maximilian screamed, his voice now coming from just outside our door. You forced us to take extreme measures. I heard the distinctive scrape of a match being struck. The sound froze my blood. In that moment, I realized that all our legal maneuvering, all our evidence gathering, all our careful planning had been rendered meaningless by one man's descent into murderous madness. The Westfield family doesn't leave witnesses. The match flew through the air in a perfect arc, landing in the gasoline-soaked hallway, with a soft whoosh that immediately became a roaring inferno. Flames raced along the walls like living things, consuming everything in their path with terrifying speed. The whole house erupted in flames with us still inside. The flames moved faster than I had calculated. Within seconds, the hallway outside our bedroom had become a corridor of hell-orange tongues, licking at the ceiling as black smoke poured through every crack and crevice. The temperature spiked so quickly I could feel my skin beginning to burn just from proximity to the door. "Parker, we have to move now," I shouted over the roar of the fire, grabbing his arm and pulling him toward the window. But Maximilian had anticipated our escape route. Through the smoke and flames, I could see his silhouette blocking the hallway that led to the front of the house, a crowbar gleaming in his hand like some medieval weapon. His face was illuminated by the firelight, twisted into a mask of murderous satisfaction. "No one leaves," he screamed, his voice barely audible over the crackling inferno. "If I can't have my family's empire, nobody gets to have their family." The window behind us was our only option, but it was a 15-foot drop onto concrete patio stones. Parker might survive the fall, but in his current state of shock, he could just as easily break his neck. I had to get us past Maximilian and to the front door. I pushed Parker behind me and grabbed the baseball bat, knowing it was inadequate against a crowbar, but having no other choice. "Stay behind me, son." Maximilian swung the crowbar at my head as I charged through the burning doorframe. I ducked, but the smoke had affected my vision too. The metal bar caught me across the shoulder, sending lightning bolts of pain down my arm and knocking me to my knees. "Dad," Parker's voice cut through the roar of flames. Maximilian raised the crowbar for a killing blow, his face twisted with savage triumph. "Say goodbye to your pathetic father, Parker." That's when something extraordinary happened. 2 years of psychological conditioning, 2 years of learned helplessness, 2 years of being broken down into a servant. All of it shattered in an instant when Parker saw his father in mortal danger. My son launched himself at Maximilian with a primal scream that came from somewhere deeper than fear, deeper than conditioning. The impact sent both men crashing into the burning wall, the crowbar spinning away into the flames. "Don't you touch my dad!" Parker roared, grappling with Maximilian as they rolled across the burning carpet. I struggled to my feet, my shoulders screaming in pain, but my heart soaring with pride. This was my boy, not the broken servant the Westfields had created, but the strong man I'd raised. Maximilian broke free and scrambled for the crowbar, but I was already moving. My engineer's eye had caught something crucial, the way the flames had weakened the main support beam, running across the ceiling directly above us. The wood was charred and sagging, held up more by habit than structural integrity. "Parker, get clear!" I shouted. As Maximilian grabbed the crowbar and turned toward my son, I kicked at the wall with both feet, hitting the exact spot where the compromised beam connected to the load-bearing stud. The impact sent vibrations through the weakened wood, and physics did the rest. The beam came down like the hammer of God. Maximilian's scream was cut short as 200 pounds of burning timber crashed onto his chest, pinning him to the floor. His eyes went wide with shock and pain, but the flames were already reaching for him with hungry fingers. "Come on, Dad." Parker grabbed my good arm, supporting my weight as we stumbled toward the front door. Together, father and son, we kicked open the warped door and escaped into the storm. Behind us, the house groaned and settled as structural supports failed one by one. With a thunderous crash that shook the ground, the entire second floor collapsed into the inferno, taking Maximilian Westfield with it. Fire trucks and ambulances were arriving, but would Parker survive the smoke inhalation? 6 months later, I stood on the Travis County Courthouse steps, squinting in brilliant Austin sunshine as reporters gathered around Caroline Whitmore for her Victory Press conference. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Where we'd once faced the Westfield mansion as desperate underdogs, we now emerged from justice halls as vindicated victors. The jury's verdict sends a clear message, Caroline was saying with satisfaction. No family, regardless of wealth or connections, is above the law for human trafficking and conspiracy to commit murder. Behind her, through glass doors, Wellington Westfield was led away in handcuffs and orange jumpsuit. The man who'd threatened to destroy us now looked like what he was, a convicted felon facing 15 years in federal prison. His 4-generation empire had crumbled spectacularly. The judge's words still echoed. Mr. Wellington Westfield, you are sentenced to 15 years without parole for human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and racketeering. The civil judgment was equally devastating. $3.5 million awarded to Parker for forced labor, psychological torture, and attempted murder. Every Westfield asset from the mansion to shell companies was liquidated to pay what they owed us. Ah, Dad, ready to go. Parker appeared beside me, looking healthier than he had in years. Dr. Morrison's counseling had worked wonders, but more importantly, he'd found his purpose again. The broken man washing cars in servant uniform had been replaced by someone stronger than ever. More than ready, I replied, putting my arm around his shoulders. The settlement money had given Parker options beyond rebuilding his old life. Carter Technologies was smaller than TechVision Solutions, but built on hard-won wisdom and unshakable family bonds. Are you nervous about the product launch? I asked, as we drove toward his modest downtown building. Parker's smile was genuine, unmarked by the haunted expression that had shadowed him so long. With you as advisor, how could I be nervous? Staying in Austin permanently had been easy. After 10 years in Germany, after nearly losing my son to suited monsters, I'd learned what mattered. Success meant nothing if family suffered while you were away. Carter Technologies occupied a converted warehouse top floor, with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows. Parker had hired 12 employees, all overlooked by bigger companies given second chances as he'd been given one. Ladies and gentlemen, Parker addressed the small crowd of investors, employees, and reporters. I'd like to introduce Guardian, an AI platform designed to identify and report human trafficking operations. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same technology that had made Parker wealthy was now protecting other victims from his suffering. Every algorithm, every detection pattern has been designed with one goal. Parker continued, voice growing stronger. Making sure no one else endures what I endured. Making sure no other family fights the battles we fought. I watched from the back chest, swelling with pride, having nothing to do with financial success. This was the son I'd raised, not the Westfield's broken servant, but a man who'd transformed trauma into purpose. As investors lined up for partnerships, Parker caught my eye and smiled. I saw not just my successful son, but my friend, business partner, and living proof that love and determination could overcome even the darkest circumstances. The Westfields had tried to destroy us, but only made us stronger. They'd attempted to break our bonds, but forged them unbreakably. Most importantly, they'd taught us that home isn't a place you work toward from thousands of miles away. It's wherever your family needs you most. And I was exactly where I belonged. Looking back on this true story, I realize how close I came to losing everything that truly mattered. For 10 years, I chased success in Germany while my son suffered in silence. Don't make my mistake. Don't let career ambitions blind you to your family's pain. This true story taught me that God has a way of bringing us home when we're needed most. I believe the Lord guided me back to Austin at exactly the right moment, just as He guides all of us through our darkest hours. Sometimes, what looks like coincidence is actually divine intervention. The Westfield family thought they could exploit a vulnerable man without consequences, but they forgot that God sees everything and justice always finds its way. Parker's courage in that burning house showed me that faith and family bonds can sustain us through unimaginable hardship. These grandpa stories aren't just about my experience. They're about the power of love that can never truly be broken. When I saw Parker transformed from successful CEO to broken servant, I understood that no amount of money can replace being present for your family's struggles. If you're working far from home, remember that success means nothing if your loved ones are suffering while you're away. This true story could have ended very differently if I'd arrived even a few weeks later. The greatest blessing wasn't the court victory, it was Parker calling me Dad with genuine love again. These grandpa stories remind us that being present is the most precious gift we can give our families. That's why I share these grandpa stories, to inspire other fathers to prioritize what truly matters before it's too late. Don't wait for a crisis to bring you home. Never underestimate the power of a parent's love to move mountains when their child needs them most. If this story touched your heart, please share your own family experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that celebrate the unbreakable bonds of family love.